join me in welcoming Mark Schenker.
Thanks for coming. I will tell you on a personal note that my last unmarried child got married this past weekend. My 40-year-old son, a lawyer in New York, Matthew, and I invoke him now because many years ago when he was about 8 or 9 years old and I was working as a dean at Yale, I did a book event at the Willoughby Wallace Library in Stony Creek, and Matthew was with me because I was in charge of him. He's my son after all, no one else was around. So I took him to the library, I put him in the children's play area, I showed him where I'd be in a room like this, and told him if he needed me, he could come in the back door and wave. So a few minutes into my beginning, he came in the back door only out of curiosity to see what I was doing. Now he's 8. He's never had a class where they talked about literature. He asked me on the way, what do you do? I said I talk to him about books. He looks in the group, he pulls back and he does a little rascal's. So when I'm done, we're driving home, he says to me, did those people not read the book? The only thing he could think of is why so many people would show up is so that I could tell them what they didn't read. Well, he's 40 now, he gets it, he'll graduate. So those of you who've been here before know that I'm fond of saying that you can run a very good book group, do yourselves, without a leader, by asking just 2 questions, one of which is, what is this book about? Not a simple question about any book, even if you think a book is simple. And the second question is, what's it like to read this book? Not whether you like it, but what's it like to read this book? Even people who disagree about how they feel about Dickens and Jane Austen can answer the question, reading Dickens is very different from reading Jane Austen. And you get at that not by asking you whether you like them or not, that's fine, but what's it like to read it? And most people have a pretty good sense that when you read a Stephen King novel, it's different, the climate, the feel, than a John Updike novel and so on. So I'm going to begin with that first question. What is this book about? I always stop talking at some point. Yes, thank you.
I mean, it seems to be kind of about,
just loud enough for them.
It seems to be kind of about how how people make sense of their own stories, I guess, to kind of create narratives for themselves of their own lives. Just thinking, I mean, most explicitly in the case of Billy, who's really thinking about how Emmett's story and his own story fits into a kind of classic Greek narrative.
So it's certainly about storytelling. Not all of the characters talk in first person. In fact, very few do narrate their own stories. But even when Woolley is being talked about, or Sarah is being talked about, you're getting their story in these compartmentalized sections. There are 10 chapters. You notice it's a countdown, right? Mm-hmm. So 10. I always thought that you could say to somebody, oh, I'm already on chapter 10. There are 59 subchapters. This is what I do when I have time on my hands. Who do you think has the most subchapters?
I think it was Duchess.
Duchess. Duchess has 18, and he's a first-person narrator. That matters. Yeah. That he has 18 doesn't really matter. But that he is a first-person narrator. Everything in Duchess's sections, he tells us. Who's the other first-person narrator? Sally. So if you were coming at this from a literary point of view, not just how you feel about it or the excellent point that's about making stories about identity, an 18-year-old is coming of age belatedly because of his circumstances, but the 2 first-person narrators have a distinction as being, in some ways, the most complicated in Duchess and the least complicated in Sally. A man and a woman, somebody who's bedeviled by the notion that he's got to get payback and revenge, and Sally's just the opposite, right? I mean, Sally makes comments about the difference between men and women. You gotta love her. The Grand Canyon's big, Statue of Liberty is big, but nothing's bigger than a man's ego. Guilty, right, I get it. Sally, though, does not believe in paying back She believes in curing, helping, ransoming, which is her last name. She's a saver. So to go back to you about stories, even when someone's not telling their story, like Billy or Wooly, there's a story being told about them. It is very much about a collection of stories individually and communally about American identity. Thank you. What else is the book about?
Well,
I can't, just loud enough. Yeah,
okay.
please.
Well, in some sense, as you said, it's a coming of age story. It's an adventure story of this collection of youths, really.
Right.
And of course, it has a kind of a dark ending as it gets more and more complicated in the psychology.
It's a dark beginning too, when you get down to it. There's a lot of darkness throughout the book. Yeah.
But it's a great read. I mean, it's a real story. It's kind of a. And for a while, it seems almost like a Wizard of Oz kind of story of Peter Pan.
Well, there's a lot of magic,
Peter
references
Pan
to magic and
adventures
heroes,
and
little Billy's
Are we
book.
really there? Is it real? Is it fable?
Right.
You know, yeah.
Well,
And they
like
figure
the
out-
Wizard of Oz, it's a quest story. Billy wants to find his mother. That's out in San Francisco. The guys have to find their car. This novel set in 1954, at the height of the interstate highway system, the first roads in America designed for automobiles. This is a big deal. It's not only a road story, like Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, of seeing America. It's also a quest story in two different directions. West Coast to get mom, East Coast to get the guys who stole the car and the money. And after the business is done on the East Coast, the reunited virtual family, there's no marital relations going on between Emmett and Sally, and all to the better, they're heading west. Yeah, so although it's a dark ending, Emmett's life, as we experience in the book, begins with one unintentional murder and one semi-unintentional murder. What else is the book about?
Race and class?
I'm sorry, someone raised her
I'm
hand.
sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's all right, you're allowed, I just didn't
Okay.
see you. Yes, ma'am.
It's a quest for family. The four principals have all been separated from a parent, I guess all of them are parents.
Right.
And in each case, they're searching for something they never had. And that takes you into some pretty dark places, like the Bowery in New York, or, where one was looking for his father, who was
Right.
an actor,
Or
supposedly.
most any place in New York,
Right.
if you come from Nebraska. No, I'm a New Yorker, I'm being serious. That
Right.
the idea that they're going to Times Square, that they're heading into the big city, is daunting, right? And in a lot of quest stories, you grow up because you don't have parents to rely on. There's no Auntie M on the trip with Dorothy. She has to rely on her own resources. Yes, very much a quest. And that fits into Billy's love of these heroes. There's a guy named Ulysses who acts heroically in the story. But of course, it's not about fables. It's actually about the kind of heroism that some of these characters find. Sally seemed wired with it. Yesterday afternoon, I was in Fairfield talking about Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, where it's clear that based on her mother and father, the woman image in her fiction is a person of great beauty, affection, emotion, familial love, maternity, all of that. And the male figures often tend to be intellectual and harder, rational, and so on. And I quoted the line from John Irving. I'm not a great fan of John Irving's novels, but I am a great fan of his book reviews and his criticism. And Irving said that if life's a forest, women are the trees. If life's a forest, women are the trees. And Sally, who is the only other first-person narrator, is critical to that creation of a sort of family. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that it's also kind of a microcosm of America in the 50s. America in the 50s. you know,
Yes, yes.
With race, with Midwest, with
Absolutely.
urban centers, all of that kind of coming together.
Right. The main thing this novel is about is America. Now here's the thing about talking about book readers. You might be a very good reader of this book, and you may have gotten the quest, the coming of age, the identity, the family, the dark beginning, and you may not have stopped to think that this novel, in my view, is first and foremost about America. That's why it's called Lincoln Highway. Lincoln Highway, a highway created to let people drive around America. It's believed that Americans were responsible for the Sunday drive. Where are we going? Nowhere. Great, I love it. The year after this book is set, Disneyland was created. Now, there were amusement parks in other places before America, but America perfected the amusement park. You get on a ride, where does it go? Back here. You come back here. What's the point of the ride? The ride. That idea of movement without a destination, of filling up time with space. There were carousels in Europe hundreds of years before Disneyland. But Walt Disney made an amusement park an American phenomenon the year after this. 1954, we talk about things in America. Brown versus Board of Ed. Separate but equal is inherently unfair. The 50s is a great American decade of America, post-war Eisenhower America, interstate roads, America on the brink of its own identity. And it's very much a book about America. Now, the point I want to make, and I've said before in this room, if you want to be a better reader, don't just read more books, spend more time with readers. You could get this book and understand it and observe the several things that were said, but it might help you if, what's your name?
Sam.
Sam?
Yep.
Uncle Sam. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing to do with it. But it might help you if someone that you don't know observes something that maybe you would never see no matter how many times you read the book. The book is fundamentally about America, about the American dream, which can be family, can be questing, can be heroic, can be freedom. The good thing about Emmett is he's learned his lesson. He believes he has to atone for the mistakes he made. When he gets a second chance to do the same thing over again with the guy's brother, he refuses. But not Duchess. Duchess gets a 2x4 and belts the guy and says to Emmett, the debt is paid. America is made up of different kinds of people. When Duchess convinces the guy to go out to go to the movies, remember, and he's caught in the rain. Who's the star of the movie they're going to see? Remember what movie they're going to see? It's a John Wayne movie. That is, it's America, John Wayne. My point isn't that if you miss that it's about America, or if you disagree, and you're welcome to, that you've done anything wrong or different. But if you have someone show up and they point something out that you then see, you've seen something that you could never see on your own, which is why books are meant to be, eventually, a communal experience. In the same way that language is communal. You can have your own private language for everything, you just won't get very far in communicating. But we agree what words mean. We agree in some other limited sense what a book means. And this is very much about America. Eisenhower America, I don't say that snidely. I was born in 1953. I was born in Eisenhower America. But the book is also about that. Anything else to add about what you think the book is about? And for those, how many of you have never been at one of my things before? All right, get out, go. I point out that if you were to ask, what is the novel Gone with the Wind about? And I don't recommend you reading it unless you want to read it as a document of racism. It's a great, terrible book. But if you were doing it, and someone said, what is this book about? And you mentioned all the things, the end of plantation society to a point. Someone might say, I think it's also about the Great Depression. You might say, wait a minute, it's set in the 1860s and it's not even in the 20th century. Well, nobody reading the novel when it came out in the 1930s who was suffering through depression, the Great Depression, will hear Scarlett O'Hara say, "I'll never go hungry again," and not think of their own circumstances. It was written about a certain time, but it's also about now. In the same way that if we were to see a movie now where the World Trade Center towers figured significantly in the plot of the movie, even if you're not a New Yorker, that movie got changed, not by the intention of the author, but by life, and that counts. It counts. If they discovered all of a sudden a new great novel by Dickens, and one of the characters' last name was Hitler, that book is forever changed, and that counts. Doesn't have to be intentional. So I do think if you think of it in the broadest sense of America, a collection of individuals, of their stories. This is why the book has so many sub-chapters. People get their own time on stage in a way. Walt Whitman decided to call his collection, so he's a great mid-19th century poetry, large, I Hear America Singing. He called the collection of all his poems Leaves of Grass. And most of us don't think of grass having leaves, we think of grass having blades. But when we say blades of grass, it's a dead metaphor. When he changes it as a poet to leaves of grass, we experience the sense of grass in a new way. It's not just a field or a lawn, monolithic, it's leaves of grass. And why did he call it leaves of grass? Because the American democratic enterprise is made up of individuals. 59 subcompartments, 8 points of view in this novel. You notice the number 8 comes up several times. This is a book about America and all the other things too. You don't have to choose. So we'll take a pause there for a moment and I'll ask, what's it like to read this book? You have to do all the work today. What's it like to read this? Yeah.
It's fun.
Sorry?
It's fun to read that.
Uh-huh.
It has a lot of, it's almost like a serial that you come to the end of a chapter and there's a cliffhanger and then you've got to go on and read the next.
Right.
That's one part of the fun. Another part of the fun is that there are a lot of jokes. I mean, little jokes.
Yeah.
Like there's the guy that looks like he's wearing overalls even when he's not. Or there's, at some point Emmett has the choice to go to Hastings-on-Hudson or Montclair in New Jersey.
Yes.
And Montclair has the disadvantage of being in Jersey.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. Yes.
kind of
Yes.
joke.
Yes. So
So
it
it's
is.
fun.
It is. I agree with you completely. It is a welcoming phenomenon that long, heavy books are broken up into many chapters. And there's something refreshing about getting done with, say, a difficult chapter about Duchess, and then the next one you're with Woolley, or you're with Sally. It makes it easier to take. Also, part of the reason it's fun is it's a teenager's novel. I don't mean to read, although they're welcome to it. It's about young people, and even though some of them have been through difficult times and have lost family members, have been incarcerated, one of them is having mental health issues, one of them is having what you might call character issues. There's a vibrancy to it of being on the road or on a train, searching for America with young people. It's a good thing. I do think it's fun. What else is it like to read this book? Yes.
I like the fact that it moved along.
I'm sorry?
I like the fact that it moved along. It didn't get bogged down anywhere where you're like, oh God, I just want to skip past this. It was like moving, constantly happening, and stuff you would have never imagined. It was not predictable. Like, oh, well, I know what the next thing will be. You know, stuff would come up and you're like, wow, never imagined that happening.
Yeah. As soon as it begins, the car is stolen.
Yes.
They're going to drive. Billy wants to go to San Francisco. They're going to go to New York, or they're going to go to Times Square.
Yeah.
But then they're going to take a train. And again, what more American image of mobility than being on a train? The idea that the chapters count down, which on the one hand is just a gimmick, but a countdown means you know that it's going to end with number 1. When they were first designing the system at NASA for how they were going to do the launch of missiles, unmanned missiles, the first countdowns were not countdowns, they were counts. 1, 2, 3, and at 10 they went. And somebody said to whoever's in charge of the counting, how did we know you were going to go at 10? Maybe it was 1, 2, 3. Why did we count down? Because everybody knows that 1 is the last number. Brilliant. And so they counted down. This actually happened. The novel counts down, which gives you the sense that whatever's going to happen, there's going to be an ending, that's some kind of resolution, right? They get the money. They're headed to San Francisco. Sally joins the group. There is a very good critical work about English and American fiction. If I were younger, I could tell you who wrote it. I like to tell you who wrote it, but it's called The Sense of an Ending. There's a novel by that name. I'm talking about a book about how novels get written called The Sense of the Ending. And the general argument of this book is that British novels conclude, reader, I married him, you get the job, you get the child, you get the woman or the man. Jane Austen's novels all resolve. Most of Dickens' novels resolve. The argument was that although British novels conclude, American novels stop. Ahab doesn't get the whale. Ishmael comes back and maybe going out again, maybe not. Huckleberry Finn is brought back into society, and the last thing he says is he's going to head out to the West. He doesn't want any part of soap and civilization. The idea of this flux, how does The Great Gatsby end? We beat on constantly against the past, about the current of the past. That there's something about the American, of course I'm generalizing broadly. I got an hour and a half, give me a break. There's something about the American condition that does not want to conclude, but just stop or stop for a while. And not every road trip, not every road movie, not every road novel necessarily ends well, but they end because they're on a trip. And de facto, a trip has an ending. And you can take that notion of the lack of finality in a lot of American novels to go to the fact that we are a nation that was founded in the idea of restlessness. Emerson said, I am an endless seeker with no past on at my back. And that idea that just to move is to be American. To do something as an end in itself. What country do you think invented chewing gum? It wasn't France. What do you do with it? You chew it and then you spit it out. Oh, fascinating. American studies courses are fascinated by that idea of the action, the trip, the process as being an end in itself. What else would you say about what it's like to read a book? Yes.
Sorry, I was.
Don't be sorry, and talk loud enough and talk at them.
Well, I had a thought.
You're talking at me.
I had a thought about the reverse order of the chapters. I hadn't thought about the countdown, actually. It makes a lot of sense, but as also kind of, I mean, in part I wondered about the whole diamond-shaped narrative that it talks about, and we're starting in the middle, so it's getting narrower as we go. But then I was also thinking about it as being kind of in reverse, and if normally chapter 1 is the first chapter, is there some sense that it's actually kind of the source of the story is there at the end, and thinking about how much of the action of the story is in fact driven by Duchess's choices and preoccupations, and of course it ends with him making a kind of fatal choice.
He gets the curtain scene. He's the last one narrating. He is a narrator, and he has more chapters than anyone. I mean, that's a lot to be said for that.
So I was kind of wondering if it was almost kind of the reverse ordering of the chapters and stuff was also partly about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that some novels do is they depend upon your forgetting that it's a novel. Jane Austen does not write her novels to let you think you're writing a novel. That's why she's so popular. She's also a wonderful writer. Dickens does not break into his novel to say, by the way, you're reading a book. Modernists like Lawrence and Conrad and Woolf and James and Joyce, you cannot read 3 chapters of Ulysses. I could end it there, right? You can't read 3 chapters of good luck. No, you can't read 3 chapters of a novel and not be reminded that you're reading a novel. Joyce not only wants you to remember that you're reading a novel, he wants you to remember that you're reading a novel that he wrote. He's allowed his ego. But most works of fiction work with the contract that when you're reading, you believe this is reality. That the fourth wall isn't broken, right? I mean, that's what a lot of people like about reading. The backward numbering, the design, the fact that there are so many characters, some of whom are kooky, the whole thing about that book of heroes, it's impossible, even though there's a lot of social realism in the book. Those opening chapters, Emmett's character, the warden, Sally, the ransom being kind to Billy, his losing his father, real things. Man killed a man accidentally, went to prison. Very serious things. But in toto, you're remembering as you read that this is a novel. Is that not right? That map in the beginning, I know where the states are. I know that if you're going to go from New York to Times Square to San Francisco, I know what it looks like. But the map is another kind of artifice, which is what a map is. It's a representation of something that's real, but it's not real here. It's not in the book. It's a picture in the book. I do think part of the fun, part of what you were talking about, is that you're being reminded that this is a novel, which doesn't mean you shouldn't take it seriously. It means it's saying something artistic about life. When you read very realistic novels, when you read genre fiction, you know, you read a spy novel or a romance novel or a Western, nothing wrong with those. But those novels don't want you to think that you're reading something artistic about life. They want you to read a genre. People aren't really people, they're props in a story. Very satisfying, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but a novel like this, he's an excellent writer. Didn't you find it well written?
Oh, yeah.
He's well written, he's an excellent writer too, in the conception that he wants us to remember that this is a story. It's loaded with stories. America is loaded with stories. Lincoln, the man, was loaded with stories. Other nations have storytellers. Mark Twain was a great American storyteller. One of the funniest things I've ever read is that Mark Twain said that as a young man, he was so good looking that he was walking down the streets of San Francisco in the rainy season and he was mistaken for fair weather. Listen, you can't read that and not laugh. I want to say this again. I don't mean America is unique. All countries are countries. But these things are distinctive about America. And the book is partly a celebration about that, too. Other things about what is like to read the book, if you want to branch out to how you found it, if you want to be more about your opinion or what you liked or didn't like about it. We'll take a break around 20 of 8, and then we'll come back again in 10 minutes, and we'll go to as much energy as you have to about 8:15 or so. So, something else to say, or if you have an answer, but I haven't asked the right question yet, just give the answer. Yes?
What kept me going was the fun the author was having with language.
And of course, your commitment to this book event. I'm kidding.
Well,
I'm kidding.
I
It's a
didn't really
joke.
like it when I started it. I was gonna put it down, but then something kept me going, and then I really got into it. But when he does things like, why do all questions start with W? What, where, who, when? I mean, it's just little things like that he tosses in that I
Yeah.
find so amusing.
Yeah.
And making up words like stay puttery, staying in one place,
Right.
stay puttery. I just find that wonderful.
I do too, and as a young person myself, I was always confused by how adults talked about things. I'll tell you just very briefly, my foster mother, when I was about 8 or 9, gave me the task of scrubbing the outside of her nice crystal salt and pepper shaker, scrubbing with the appropriate cloth to get rid of the grit on the outside. And you know, I'm 8 years old, I'm not particularly strong. I'm 70 now, I'm not particularly strong. But I wanted to do it to impress her. I couldn't get it all out. So she said, fine. I went away, I did whatever kids do. I came back, they were perfectly clean. And I said to her name was Rose, we called her Mama Rose. Mama Rose, how did you do that? She said, I used elbow grease. Elbow grease. In my 8-year-old mind, I'm thinking, blank you. Why didn't you give me elbow grease? You could have helped me out. And I left the kitchen in a fit. There's nothing worse than a kid who's angry because they think they've been treated unfairly. I came back later and she said, what's with you? I said, you could have given me the elbow grease. She laughed, didn't help. She said, no, elbow grease. And she explained it to me, and I'm like, why don't you tell a kid? I thought it was something she kept in a jar. How would you know? How would you know? Yeah. Other things about your own reaction, Sam?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying I'm a scientist, and so there was a suspension of belief that started to happen as the novel was going on, and I felt like the way he wrote about the Midwest, which is also where I grew up, was so realistic that then as they started traveling, there were parts of my brain that were like, oh, there's no way you're gonna get from here to there in that period of time. Or, you know, when they throw in the cliffhanger elements, there were times when it started feeling a little supernatural. It took me a little while to catch on.
And there are references to magic and fairy tales.
Yeah.
There's references to Shakespearean acting and the idea of drama. And you know, when you're in a play, when you're watching a play, when you're attending a play, you know it's not real, but you experience it real. And a play has the advantage that there's actually somebody up there, a body, being King Lear or being Lady Macbeth, which is different from having to imagine real people when you're reading. I do think part of the playfulness of this book, which also has very serious issues about child abuse, about dysfunctional families, about the future of America in 1954, with everything being what it is, the same way you could raise that question about the future of America now. But I do think it's a remarkably complicated book that reads very simply. It's not a tough read. Yeah. And the next book isn't a tough read either. And I will say that one of the women that I had in my book group in New Haven for years, and she was an elementary school teacher and a very good reader, she said to me after one book event that we did, can't we ever read a book that has a beginning, a middle, and an end in that order? I said that they're not making them so much anymore. This book has a beginning, a middle, and an end in that order. Yeah. Yes?
I think one of the things that I found it thoroughly enjoyable to read and perplexing, and I think it was partly, there's a lot of mystery going on. You don't know what's going on with Wooly and what is the secret sauce. First you think it's liquor, but and there is the humor. Somebody mentioned that. There's that moment when I think it's Duchess is looking for his father, and he goes into the offices downtown and looking for it, and he comes across the clown, and there's that bird, and it's just very funny scenes.
Yeah.
But it does leave you, every time you're reading, especially Duchess, there's such a sophistication in his, and it's almost shocking when you hear at the end that he's illiterate, because his chapters are very, very sophisticated, and he's analyzing what's been going on, and he's manipulative, and there's so many machinations going on in his mind.
Right.
But
Can I interrupt you for a
Yeah,
second?
of course.
You'll remember your point? Will you remember your point?
Okay.
So I recently reread The Talented Mr. Ripley, Patricia Highsmith, 1955. for a two-person book group that I have with a friend. And I was remarking on how Tom Ripley is brilliant in imagining and keeping all the balls in the air. You know, he's an imposter, he's a murderer. If that ruins the book for you, where the hell have you been? It's been out for half a century. One of the things about Duchess is that when you're somebody who is raised in his childhood circumstances, you pay attention. You know how people work. You have more invested in how the world works than Emmett or Billy does. Because they're innocents. They are. And Duchess is not an innocent. You see this if any of you have ever worked in any capacity, or if you're a relative or a dear friend or beloved of somebody who has been failed or supported by a social welfare system, that the kids who come up through that kind, remember when he comes and he brings the jams to the kids?
Yeah.
When you're that kind of person, you have your antenna out all the time.
Yeah.
You're savvy. It's what they used to call street smarts, but it's survival. And Duchess's monologues show that kind of nature. And Tom Ripley, The Talented Mr. Ripley, if you've never read it, I recommend it to you. It's not written in the first person. It's all Tom this, Tom that. But the camera is always on Tom's shoulder. There's no scene where Tom's not in it because it's from his point of view. Literary critics call that oriented narration. And you get a sense of what this boy, Tom Ripley as a boy, Duchess as a boy, Huckleberry Finn as a boy, Holden Caulfield as a boy, what they had to do to survive a kind of second nature savviness. And it is striking when you see it in literature and heartbreaking when you see it in life. I'm going to take a break now, but before I do, I'm going to say to you that I want to pitch to you the best book I've read this year. And unlike this book, it is 115 of these pages, shorter than the Keegan books we've done, 115 of these pages, and it's called Gachar, Gachar. I'll leave it up here for you to look at. Gachar, Gachar, Gochar, Ghochar. Nonsense Indian words, that is from the nation of India, by a writer who writes in Canada, Kannada. And the title, this is not a spoiler, it has something of a mystery to it, the novel, so I'm not giving anything away, is nonsense words like mumbo jumbo would be, or higgly piggly, nonsense Indian words made up by a character in the book about when a situation gets all tangled up, like when you go to the junk drawer and all the string is knotted up, or when you try to fix your necklace and the chain is all mixed up. It is 7 short chapters. Best book I read this year, Gachar. I recommend it to you. It's short, but you'll have to read it twice because you want to. You want to go to. It's first person narrated by a man who doesn't identify himself, and when you get to the end, you're going to want to read it again, only because you will have missed some things, not because of you, but because of the book. Okay, 10 minutes, smoke them if you got them, but outside. So I'm going to resume, and I'm going to correct a mistake. The writer whose novels I'm not fond of is John Updike. If I said something else, I might have said John Irving. I'm a great fan of John Irving, so I want to correct that, and now I'm recorded in error. John Updike's criticism, I think, is wonderful. I'm not a fan of his novels. I'm going to cite my son Matthew a second time to say that when he got older, he would come to some of my book groups, especially if I was doing a book that he had read as a Yale undergraduate. He's a lawyer now. And he heard me say to somebody that I was at a library where one of the women who came to the library was in 2 different book groups that I had and came to everything I did in Greenwich, Wilton, Ridgefield, or Westport. She was retired. She was a great fan of literature. I guess she was a great fan of mine. And Matthew overhears me saying this about this woman, now dead, being a big fan. And Matthew says to his mother, my ex-wife, it's an awful lot of Mark Schenker. You gotta love that. You gotta love that kid. So I have said to this group that you could teach, or I could teach, a very strong survey of literature by looking at 3 perspectives or 3 themes. One of those is secrets. Now, to some extent, any novel, even a novel that's not a mystery or a thriller, has the secret of how is it going to end. It may be a very mild secret. It may be that the stakes are very high. Anybody reading Great Expectations thinks that Pip is going to get married because every other Dickens novel's ended that way. He goes back home because he thinks Biddy's waiting for him, because that's how Dickens novels work. Every contemporary reader of that 1861 novel knows that Pip is going to go back to his next door neighbor, Biddy. You know that she's a domestic woman. Her name is Biddy. And it turns out Biddy was looking at her watch and said, it's chapter 13. Where the hell is he? And she marries someone else. And Pip never marries. And so even novels where you think you've got it figured out, you don't know. So secrets is one great theme in lots of novels. A second is the theme of doubling, of doubles. It can be a repetition. It can be a mirroring, a reversal. So a mirror doesn't double, it reverses. I part my hair on the left. The guy that I shave parts his hair on the right. The mirror turns things around. There are characters in this book who are doubles of each other, who are versions of each other. Not necessarily copycat identities, but there are versions of each other. That Sarah and Sally are the only 2 significant women in the novel. You can see affinities there, made closer by the fact that they have similar names, which may or may not be intentional. But reversals, repetitions, doubling, very common in many, many books. For one thing, dramas that depend upon an antagonist and a protagonist, the word in Greek for struggle is agon. It's where we get agony from. A protagonist is the person moving the struggle forward, the antagonist in the other direction. And there's a way in which Duchess and Emmett, who have the most chapters almost identical, are doubles of each other, by which I don't mean straight repetition. And the third and maybe the most interesting theme that I would look at is ghosts. And I don't just mean ghosts in the sense of spooky ghosts, although I mean that too. I define ghost in my literature courses as the presence of an absence. My Aunt May, my godmother, is long dead. She's dead, she's gone. If I think of her, I am reminded that she's gone, and so she becomes a kind of ghost to me. I am reminded by her presence that she's absent. If we were to take down one of these pictures, if it had been on this wall for 30 years, and removed it, you'd see the discoloration. Actually, you'd see the brighter color behind it, and you'd know from its shape and size, rectangular, about that big, you'd know that something was there that's gone. How would you know? By the presence of its absence. Am I making sense? If Aunt May is dead and I never think of her, she's gone. If she didn't die and rallied, she's here. But if I remember that she's gone, she's a ghost in the sense of being present or absent. Billy's mother is such a ghost, not just in the sense that she's gone, but he's aware constantly that she's gone. Her absence is always present. He's haunted by his mother. When he lays out those postcards in the beginning, it's like he's telling a fortune. It's very poignant. And there are other figures who are not just absent, like Duchess's father, but intensely present in their absence. And I call that a ghost. And I'm not being clever or coy. Life is filled with those reminders of absence. And a lot of what fiction does, a lot of what art does, is it tries to compensate, offset, or fulfill that absence. Tolstoy is supposed to have said, I want to believe he said this, that he looked around the world and didn't see anyone like Anna Karenina, so he made her. That is, the world lacked something and he filled the gap. Some artists believe that what literature does is complement, with an E, reality. But Emily Dickinson, one of my favorite poets, did not think that things could be complemented, things could be fulfilled so easily. Emily Dickinson is the opposite of Walt Whitman's grandiose, large imagination and optimism. She's the person who feels she was given very little by a Calvinist God, and she has to protect it. And her poetry, brilliant, is filled with heartbreaks and deaths and dying. She lived on the notion that sometimes all we have is the ghostly reminder of what we've lost. And so I do think that in this book, the idea of people living under the burden of the presence of an absence, it's a good phrase. It turns out to cover a lot of things in literature. And Emily Dickinson said in one of her notebooks, nature is a haunted house. That is, a house that's filled with absences. Maybe the absence of God, which became increasingly difficult for people to believe in the 19th century, the century when Nietzsche said, Gott ist tot. She wrote, nature is a haunted house. And underneath it, she wrote, art is a, I'm not gonna fill in the blank. What might you think Dickinson would write in that parallel statement? Nature is a haunted house. Art is, yes, the worst happens, you're wrong. We'll mock you, we'll move on. Nature is a haunted house. Art is
Reality.
louder?
Reality.
Reality, okay. That's it, reality?
Invented house.
Sorry?
Invented house.
An invented house? Yes. So I'll stop this event. Nature is a haunted house. Art is a house that tries to be haunted. There's a lot of wisdom and a lot of understanding of Emily Dickinson. I'm a schmo. I would say, if I were me, nature is a haunted house. Art is a house that seeks to exercise the haunting, seeks to fill the house, seeks to make the house whole, that art tries to cure the haunting. No, she believed that nature is a haunted house and art tries to copy the haunting, to give you the sense that things are gone. Am I making sense? She has a poem about standing outside a window where there's a lot of food inside and she's starving. And she goes inside, having lived on breadcrumbs and berries, and now she's being called to the table to have bread and wine. Get it? Bread and wine. Protestants call the altar the table. And when she gets inside, she finds she's not hungry anymore and worries that bread and wine would break her spirit because she's been living on subsistence levels of food. And the last line of the poem is, I learned that hunger is a way of watching through windows that the entering takes away. Once you get it, you don't want it. Because it filled your appetite and the expectation. She lives on the absences, she lives on the ghosts. I know that's a long-winded way of saying, but I can assure you through long experience that if you were to look for one or more of those themes in any novel, as long as it's literary fiction, that is not genre novels, nothing wrong with genre novels, but Western, spy stories, love stories that are just characters of prop. Any novel where a character is imagined to have an actual interior life, you will find those themes working. Okay, high noon, 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the novel. Anything that you wanted to say or ask each other about the book that we haven't covered yet? Yes, please.
I love the book, I love Willie, but all the escapades that happened, it's hard to believe that it was just 10 days.
Say again?
Just 10 days
Yeah.
that this occurred.
Yeah.
But there seemed to be, it just kept going on and on. And,
Yeah.
you know, like you said, a cliffhanger, so you had to read the
Yeah.
next
Completely unrealistic.
part, you know.
Did it
so-
ruin the book for you?
Pardon me?
Did it damage your appreciation of the
No,
book for you? Yeah.
no, but I kept thinking like, well, this is, how many things have they done already?
Yeah.
So, but, no, I thought it was great.
So it has some of the reality of a dream. When you see The Wizard of Oz, which is believed to be the most movie viewed in the history of the world, because it was played, I grew up in New York, the $1 Million Movie, anybody know that?
Yes.
If you missed any portion of this movie, you want to see it again, we were running it 90 times in a row. And it was a movie that was shown on every holiday, and it's a movie that grown-ups would watch, not just in the company of their kids, but they'd watch it, The Wizard of Oz. And you say to yourself, well, it turns out the entire movie basically is a dream, is a lie. But would anyone say, I want to give up the Oz part and just watch the part in the Midwest? No, the dream is what you care about. The dream is the art. I had a dear friend who was a book group host in Westport for many years. He had a granddaughter who came of 7 or 8, well before anything like DVDs and Netflix, and they decided, he and his wife, that they would host their granddaughter in Westport, maybe at the age of 8, that she was old enough now to watch The Wizard of Oz. And Grandma and Grandpa would have her over. She watched it, she liked it, she went to bed in the guest room, middle of the night, she cries up, wakes up with a nightmare. She calls her grandfather, he comes, he gives her a glass of water. He said, what's the matter? She said, I had a terrible dream that I was being chased by the wicked witch of the West. And he says to her, there is no such thing as a wicked witch of the West. He says, I know, Grandpa, but there's such a thing as a dream of the wicked witch of the West. Implicitly, schmo. Now, he told me that story, and I have told that story dozens of times, including in this room. That's the secret of art. It doesn't matter that there isn't a wicked witch of the West. The reason we watch it and enjoy it is it's credible. Even if it's unbelievable, even if it's can't have possibly done it in 10 days. And the force of its being unreally real is more powerful than if it were real. That's why people remember songs and plays and novels in a way that they don't remember the actual historical things of their own life. Every one of us is old enough, every one of us, that we can hear a song on the radio and we are immediately transported to that part of our life where that song had significance. It's an amazing thing. It's not the history that's moving us, it's the song that's bringing us back to the history. Other comments? So I want to say the unreality, the impossibility. Remember Star Trek? You remember Star Trek. Scotty, we need this thing fixed. How long is it going to take? It's going to take 19 hours, sir. We only have 10 seconds. I'll do my best. and they do it. And they do it. Yes. Oh, yes. You at this point, we're all friends here. Just speak up.
Just, I mean, it kind of tying both into this issue of unreality and the issue of absences and the issue of the idea of the quest earlier is, I think one of the things that struck me most in the book came very early on was when Wooly said to Billy, I wish I didn't know where my mother was.
Yeah.
And Billy's like, why? And it's like, so I could go looking for her like you. And just that,
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
that desire for a quest, desire for a purpose, and a desire for that lack of certainty and such, and
Right.
also it's better to have the uncertainty or something than the
Absolutely.
distasteful certainty.
And as I said about the optimism, the energy of these young people, if the car would have stayed together for its whole trip, that's a one-generation car, right? Older and younger, but that's one generation. There are parents, dead or alive, of these people, but they're not making the trip. And it turns out that those parents, the grandfather who's going to give the equivalent of $1.6 million, you have to multiply by 100, 110 or something, no, by 11 to get to our current value. Of course, Duchess's father, of course, Billy's mother, those figures matter, but they're not physically on the road with them. And of course, Americans aren't any more familiar familial than other countries. But if we're talking about this as a coming-of-age novel, of a novel about competing or different identities, families matter. Isn't it telling that at the end of the story, as Duchess, who can't swim or read, realizes that in trying to save his money, he's going to lose his life, and he's narrating his own demise, he confuses whether a line was said by Hamlet or Iago. You got to be a pretty bad reader of Shakespeare to confuse those two characters. I just want to read this. Emmett, I called, but even as I did so, I could hear the distant chiming of a clock, only it wasn't a clock and it wasn't distant. It was the gold watch that had been tucked in the pocket of my vest and that now was suddenly in my hand. Looking down at its face, I couldn't tell what time it was, but I knew that after another few chimes, the entire world would begin moving once again. So taking off my crooked hat, I bowed to Sarah and Sally like a performer. I bowed to Wooly and Billy. I bowed to the one and only Emmett Watson. And when the final chime sounded, I turned to them all in order to utter with my very last breath, "The rest is silence." Literally his last breath. He's drowning. The rest is silence. Just as Hamlet had. Hamlet had said it. Or was it Iago? I never could remember. That is a great dark joke that this remarkably complicated character can't tell the heroes from the villains. One of the most poignant scenes for me in the novel is when Sister Agnes asked Emmett to be a little bit more considerate about Duchess as a person, because he doesn't understand what Duchess has been through. Emmett was sent to prison for killing a man, and he did not lose his moral center. He comes out believing that he has to atone for the thing he did. Doesn't stop him from running away, but he has a moral center that was instilled in him however such things happen. And Duchess doesn't, and never could. And Sister Agnes is saying to Emmett, give him a break. In the movie about Capote, two of them came out in the same year, the one with Philip Seymour Hoffman, Capote, the character, is saying to somebody that Charlie Smith, Perry Smith, the murderer who he, Truman Capote, has a sexual attraction to, Perry has both a sexual attraction and a son's love of a father kind of to Truman Capote. And Capote is explaining, help me, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird? Right. She's a character in the movie, she's a character in his life. He's saying it was like we were brothers born in the same household, and I got to walk out the front door and Perry had to go out the back. Emmett got to walk out the front door and Duchess had to walk out the back. And for me, the glory of the book, I mean, I'm really getting chills, is that with all we've said about the large conception, the map, the quest, the very good things we've said about it being America, the poignancy is that characterization of Duchess. You know, I don't know nothing about golf. I only ever played mini golf. You'll be happy that I don't play real golf. But I'm always impressed that you have to actually be able to drive the ball a long distance, and then a different skill to actually get it in the cup. Not the same thing. You can have a great broad conception of reality, a plan for the book, all the things we've talked about, but if you can't write credible human beings, what's the point? And if you like this book, if you love this book, and you haven't read A Gentleman in Moscow, read it. And if you've read those two books, read Rules of Civility. And if you read all three, write to him and ask him for another book. I do think the poignancy of Duchess's character, we learn that he's Duchess because his mother dressed him the way she did, this tough guy, brutal, completely amoral or immoral, but at the end, when he does The Rest is Silence, he's giving a closure to his life that line in Hamlet, of course, is a pun. The rest of my life is nothing, I'll be dead, is silence. This talkative, to be or not to be prince, one of the longest, most lines in Shakespeare's character. But it's also that my rest, my peace, in the sense of rest in peace, my rest will be not having to talk or worry anymore. Because Hamlet's nature is to be a thinker, and he worries when he thinks about taking his life, but if he takes his life, he will have nightmares about the things he has in life. That to sleep might be to dream, and I might be just as anxious as I am now. But at the end, once he's done his task of killing his uncle who murdered his father, he can say in the punning way that Shakespeare has characters say it, the rest of my life is silence, and now I will be at peace and not have to quiz myself with yes or no. So, not bad for a book, however heavy and many pages. I don't mind that they make them long. I just wish they didn't make them so heavy. And I know there are other ways to read books, but I'm holding out. So, I'll give you a short preview of the Heaven and Earth grocery store. James McBride, who you might know from his wonderful award-winning novel, The Good Lord Bird, is himself a product of a mixed marriage. I'm not going to tell you more. You can read about him if you like, but you'll see it in the book. And the Heaven and Earth grocery store is based on a community center in a neighborhood where the Jewish people and the people of color live in relative harmony, and it goes back to the 20s and 30s. There is an actual mystery of a dead body, but there's also a celebration of a grocery store that becomes a community center, which was true of McBride's parents, who had a grocery store where if you couldn't pay, you could still eat. And it's partly a nod towards a time in the Depression when people did not care that I'm this and you're that. You're hungry, you're hungry. And you know, such poignancy now that so many people are dying. I'm not saying this politically, I'm saying this empathetically, of a human-created famine, and at the heart of it is you're this and I'm that. Anyway, it is a family novel. It is partly a novel about American culture, and the rest of what it's about, you'll tell me. Be ready when we get here next time. I'd like to see a few more people on the groom side, if that's possible, but I want to thank Rob, as I don't think I have, for inviting me back again, and I hope you'll find, have any of you read that book, Heaven and Earth grocery store? So most of you haven't. I do try to find books that if you have read them, I mean, this book was a well-known book, that you learned something you didn't learn when you read it yourself. And I also try to find books, not that are obscure, but I think it's fair to say that although Heaven and Earth grocery store appeared on lots of lists and was award-winning, it did not draw the attention that this did in terms of a notable book from the New York Times and NPR and Time Magazine. He is a more broadly read, I'm told, writer in America than McBride. Doesn't matter, I'm not comparing them. I'm only saying it's my hope that in addition to having you understand better books you've read, to introduce you to books you haven't. And I want to say again, that if you buy this book and you're disappointed in it, I will buy it from you. Wait, are we still recording?
I did order a copy from the library, which will be here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. When I have to check in my own personal library, which is now loaded with books because all the books in my office at Yale are now in my home, I've retired. I know when I look for my copy of The Talented Mr. Ripley and don't own one, it means I read it as a college or graduate student when I didn't have money to buy books. I use libraries. Sue me. And that if I find I have a copy, it means I was teaching and making money. That's my own personal history. It's a very, very good book. Again, Rob, thank you for having me. Happy Passover to those of you celebrating. Oh, this is also about America, because Billy uses American history to open up the safe. All the combination of numbers have to do with American history and Abraham Lincoln. So important. This genius kid thinks it's going to be American. The code is going to be American. Wonderful.